the thing is, UNIDO went through several stages. UNIDO was set up in the 60s during the Cold War, and basically it was set up as a middle ground between socialist Soviet Union and capitalist United States. So it kind of had to bridge
the two axes.
It was basically a non-capitalist, non-socialist route to industrialization. And basically what it did is support developing countries in setting up basic industries, heavy industries, chemical industries, engineering, this and that, state-owned companies. Once the Cold War came to an end, the whole world changed, and developing countries no longer had this option. Should we go the socialist route? Should we go the capitalist? And everything was now up to the private sector, and this also coincides with Reaganism, with the Washington Consensus, market fundamentalism. So everything was up to the private sector. So there was a view that the world doesn't need UNIDO anymore. It's up to the private sector. Developing countries need to adopt capitalism, and then private sector will take care of it.
Was it a little bit of this old age principle that we always hear about, teach people to fish instead of fishing for them?
Well, that's basically what UNIDO, UN agencies in general try to do, is build capacity, build institutional capacity, organizations.
I teach at universities as well. I don't have a degree in what I teach.
I was doing my PhD in development economics and industrial engineering.
And that's kind of what led you to UNIDO?
That's what led me to UNIDO, because I was working on technology adaptation, because my thesis was on how to measure industrial efficiency.
Ooh, which I think is something that actually went through your whole career, right?
Yes. And I was trying to find alternative ways of measuring industrial efficiency to the standard
What was more important,
way.
the efficiency part or the industrial part?
What was more important is what you attach value to when you're measuring something. How do you measure value? The standard value measurement is always dollars and cents. And I was thinking, in a development context, you have to look at other things, at things that create value that are not easily measured in dollars and cents. It was a difficult task because, a lot of the modern things that we are so used to, CSR, triple bottom line, things like that, hadn't been devised yet. So I was in the dark.
So incredibly relevant for new industrial.
It is relevant because each one of those did change the paradigm.
But a lot of the application of industrialization is still the same that it's always been, is it not?
Well, it depends what you're talking about. If you're talking about industrialization in the context of developing countries, it is changing in a different way. Whereas before, what I mentioned before during the Cold War age, it was more a government-led, a state-led type of industrialization where the state would invest.
It was a
industry.
sponsor, it was the guide, it was the strategist, it created the mission.
Now it's more private sector driven.
Okay.
Which basically involves taking advantage of the globalization of international companies that want to go out, minimize costs by spreading their operations globally.
Are you basically saying it's because these global organizations are nations unto themselves and now can dictate industrialization on a global?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
No.
What I'm saying is now the developing countries can, if they play their cards right, plug into this.
So what were your next stops? Because you started off with individual projects, but you eventually became responsible for programs.
What I did is that I figured doing these individual company to company or even group of companies to group of companies is not going to really have a big impact. You can do hundreds of these things. It's not going to move the needle. So, you got to do something that creates a system for this to operate on its own. And I thought, okay, we need some way of collecting data and making data available to people on a more general basis. So I did a test survey in 4 countries of foreign investors in these 4 African countries. Basically, a perception survey. Why did you invest in Kenya? What were you looking for? What were your objectives? How is your business going? What kind of problems do you face working in Kenya?
So you were taking a step back and looking at it from a bigger picture, from a strategic and tactical perspective.
Exactly, and basically saying, if we can collect this data and make it globally available, more companies could be informed about what opportunities there are and what their peers are doing, etc. So we did this test in 4 countries. It was very, people were very impressed by it.
Was it kind of a Tinder for economic opportunities?
That's what we were.
Tinder for economic opportunities.
Well, I was chief of unit for that.
Yeah, very cool. And you tested it for 4 different countries. What was the feedback?
The feedback was phenomenal. Yeah. And then we said, okay, we have to develop this further. And we developed further and further. It became a huge program for 20 countries where we were doing regular surveys, collecting much more in-depth data, and putting this data on like a platform, web-based platform, where companies can use it like dashboard. They can analyze their data. They can look at things they're particularly interested in. Both foreign companies can use it to identify potential partners, identify areas, countries, whatever. And countries themselves, the governments can use it to see what are their weaknesses and strengths in the eyes of actual foreign investors in their countries, where they need strengthening, where they should put their emphasis, where they have strengths that they should work on, and where they have weaknesses where perhaps they should just forget about and not waste time with.
What I hear from your what you're telling us is you started off kind of in the trenches working on projects, several of them in many different countries.
Yeah.
And then as you move forward in your position, which is actually kind of emblematic of what a project management career path could look like, is you go from projects and you start managing programs. Then you see, okay, our projects, a lot of the key aspects of a project happen before and after a project. It's kind of you got to kind of plow the earth before you can sow, right? So with this IT platform, you started saying, okay, we need to engage decision makers, people who are maybe not directly in projects during the duration of the project, but before and after. So this classical strategic and tactical thing. So that's some classical program and portfolio development. Is there a particular project that you're most fond of if you look back?
Well, this program itself was a effort that involves several projects, because the way you get projects funded in UNIDO, you can't just put together a $50 million program and get it funded for $50 million. You work on small parts of it, and in implementing it, you link all these small parts and make a program out of it. So we had a $50 million program which was funded by maybe 6 different sources.
Okay. Let's talk about funding a little bit. When we're talking about the size of your project, what types of budgets are we usually talking about?
Oh, you can have in UNIDO a small project of $20,000, $30,000.
Really, that small?
Yeah.
Okay.
Most of those types of projects are what we call preparatory projects. The idea is to do a small thing where
they're actually work packages that might lead to
a bigger project. Yeah.
Okay.
Or a small project where a country requested a specific action from UNIDO, and you do it for $34,000.
Okay.
But you have big programs, several $1 million.
So we talked about this beforehand. The definition of a program, for those of you who don't know, is a group of projects or work packages that deal with different aspects, but as a uniform mass, if they're managed together and coordinated on a program level, create a higher synergy. So like you kind of mentioned, it's kind of domino stones. I'm tipping one domino stone and that's its own thing, but it'll definitely have ramifications on follow-up domino stones as well. And what I love about the UN is they say, well, we're not going to focus on the classical financial management thing. They came up with their own model. I think it's from the UN, right? The SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. You're familiar with them. I've only printed them out so that we can show you. These are them. We'll kind of put them on the screenshot. The UN, and I think this is brilliant. I think it's brilliant from a humanistic, but also from an economic perspective, because what the UN said, listen, not just the UNIDO, if you look at the UN as a whole, okay, with humanistic missions all over in many different facets, spends hundreds of millions, if not trillions of dollars every year in projects. And one of the thing that all these organizations did is ask themselves, what value do we create? Even if we're not interested, we're not talking about return of investment or net present value or that kind of stuff. But what are we trying to generate? What are these benefits and impacts? And what they did is they came up with 17 points, just to mention a few of them. Anything that lowers poverty, anything that reduces hunger in the world, that's number 2.
Improves health.
Yeah, and 3, anything that creates a better health and well-being. Quality education, accessibility of education for a broader spectrum of the population. Gender equality, very mainstream nowadays, but not just in developed countries, but also in non-developed countries. Clean water and sanitation in the sense of sustainability. That's why it's called Sustainability Development Goals. Affordable clean energy, decent work and economic growth, and so forth and so forth. We'll throw it on the screen. Now, I love these. Now, anybody who's an executive or senior management with a for-profit company could look at this and say, that's cute. What does it have to do with us? And that was kind of my jaded perspective of how I thought some executives would act. And I'm actually surprised because there's a number of large global organizations that bought into this hook, line, and sinker. Okay? I think Coca-Cola is one of them. I don't want to make advertisement for them, but I think off the top of my head. And there's a number of other different organizations that, in cooperation with their corporate social responsibility division or staff position, have said, you know what, we have a social responsibility as well. And if we're going to measure what social value do we provide besides making money and making our shareholders happy, a lot of these organizations use this in their CSR program to evaluate additionally the value of their project. So they evaluate their projects. What's the immediate return of investment? What financial benefit? They say, what strategic benefit? Do we create efficiency, effectivity, economies of scale, or some of the classic things? And this is kind of a third facet, which I think is beautiful. I think it's great that the UN developed this for their project, but I also think it's interesting in the for-profit. I don't think a lot of for-profit companies fully understand how to apply it, but they're at least open to it. What was your experience with the SDGs? Is this something that you saw and felt was very actively used in measuring impact, or was that before your?
Before I get to that, let me comment on something you said before about private companies using this. It doesn't actually come from the companies. It's very important it's the consumers of that company's products or services. It's pressure from the consumers. There's more and more we're seeing, consumers of a product saying, hey, if you're using child labor to produce that sneaker, we're not going to buy it.
Although sometimes it's a little delayed until that response comes.
It might be delayed, yeah. but it has a big impact.
Yes.
On
people
corporate action.
People care. If they're aware, they care.
Yeah. And once the corporates are aware that their consumers watch these things and act upon them, that's what changes their activity. It's not that they're saying, these are cute, I think we'll do something about it. So this is
the tail that's wagging the dog.
Absolutely.
Good. More power to the consumer. Now
in the UN, we were just talking about what's the process of project approval. One of the questions that is, which of these SDGs does this project contribute to, and how does it contribute to that SDG?
Which makes it a great selection process.
Yeah.
Because the more, some people say, you know what, valuable things shouldn't be quantified, but why not quantify, even if it's nominal, even if it's an approximation of a number? So would you say that this was a huge value add to your selection process?
What it does is it brings together the approach. So it allows everybody to be able to say, okay, I'm doing this, and this is my map, and here's where I have to be effective.
let's talk about how does the UNIDO select its projects? And is there some kind of governing body is there a selection process? Is there a stage gate model, to use a little bit of bingo language here? Stage gate is distinct milestones that you have to achieve along the way between initiation and planning before you decide, do we really want to commit to this project or not? How does anybody at the UNIDO define or propose a project, and what is the approval process at the UNIDO?
Formally, the way to design a project is you have to get a request from a developing country, and you design a project to respond to that request.
So it's always initiated by a country?
Formally.
So there might be a lot of preliminary work. It might be one of your guys' idea, but you kind of have to...
A lot of times you write the request.
Yeah.
But
okay.
The thing is, UNIDO is in a position where, on the one hand, officially developing countries are our clients. We serve them, and we respond to their requests. But all our funding comes from developed countries.
Yeah.
So we have to also respond to what they're looking for, because once we
what is it? What they're looking for? What's their
different countries have different
political influence, economic benefits,
all of the above,
access to cheap resources, or different things.
Different things. Also different for different countries. Some countries, you do a project for them, and they demand that all the machinery you buy is from them, and all the consultants you hire are from them.
Yeah, so it's kind of.
And some countries are totally, it's your project. You do whatever you want with it. Just mentioned that it was financed by Sweden.
So good. Swedish is good.
Even they started to change eventually.
Yeah.
So we have to satisfy the two groups we're working with: the funders, and the countries that are actually supposed to benefit.
Well, it's kind of supposed to be a reciprocal circle.
Yeah.
Which I personally don't think there's anything wrong with it to do good, but also to have a personal benefit in the process. I think it just encourages investment. Otherwise we're getting into that feel good. This is goodwill.